The Orion Dominion had ruled its sector for over 4 centuries without interruption. Their fleets didn't conquer worlds anymore, they managed them. Trade routes, treaties imposed stability. War was considered inefficient, primitive, and beneath them. So when the signal arrived from deep space, the Dominion High Council almost ignored it. It was labeled Unregistered Human Transmission Origin, Earth. Earth, a forgotten name in Dominion archives. A young species that had once barely escaped its own solar system before vanishing behind expansion zones and classified borders. The message was simple, clean, unarmed. We accept your invitation for peace talks. No demands, no threats, no conditions. Just acceptance. The Dominion interpreted it the only way they knew how: submission. Within hours, Iron Spire, the neutral diplomatic station suspended between Orion-controlled systems, was activated for first contact proceedings. It was a marvel of political engineering, a massive rotating structure of glass-metal alloys shielded against weapons designed to ensure no side could gain advantage. At least that was the theory. Dominion fleets arrived first. Dozens of cruisers formed a ceremonial ring around the station, their hulls gleaming with ritual insignias. Every ship was unarmed, or at least declared so. The message was clear: we are not afraid of you. Inside Iron Spire, delegates rehearsed speeches about order, cooperation, and bringing humanity into galactic standards. One senior envoy, Verksal, adjusted his ceremonial robe and smirked. Humans always arrive late, he said. They will try to impress us with emotion, we respond with structure. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Far above them, in orbit, Dominion scanners confirmed it. No incoming threats. No anomalous energy spikes. No military buildup. Just 13 faint contacts, drifting at the edge of long-range detection. Small escort, a junior officer guessed. Or symbolic presence, another replied. They are showing respect. But deep inside the Dominion fleet's outer perimeter, something felt off. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just unfamiliar. Then space folded. Not violently, not with alarms or shockwaves. It simply shifted, like reality blinking. 13 human ships emerged from subspace. No fanfare. No communication burst. No identification signals. Just arrival. They were dark, almost featureless, absorbing starlight instead of reflecting it. Their shapes were angular but not symmetrical, like they had been designed by logic that didn't care about aesthetics. A Dominion captain frowned. Why so few? Another replied, maybe Earth is weaker than expected. Inside Iron Spire, the human transmission finally arrived again, clearer now. A calm voice, controlled, almost quiet. This is Captain Elias Rourke of the United Earth Defense Fleet. A pause. Then, we are present for peace talks. The Dominion envoy smiled confidently and stepped toward the central chamber podium. Finally, Verk said, let us begin correcting their assumptions. But in orbit, something changed. The human ships had stopped drifting. They were aligning. Not randomly. Not defensively. Precisely. Too precisely. Inside the human flagship HSR Ashes of Dawn, the bridge was dimly lit. No panic, no chatter, only controlled focus. Captain Rourke stood at the center, eyes locked on the holographic display of Iron Spire and surrounding Dominion fleets. A tactical officer spoke quietly. Sir, they're treating us like guests. Rourke didn't look away from the display. That's because they think guests can't bring knives. A pause. Rules of engagement? The officer asked. Rourke finally turned slightly. His expression wasn't angry. It was patient, like someone who had already read the ending of a story others had just begun. Rules, he said softly, only matter between those who believe the same rules apply. He stepped forward. The hologram shifted automatically, targeting overlays activating across every Dominion ship and station module. Red lines connected silently across space. Lock-on sequences began without announcement. Inside Iron Spire, the Dominion envoy reached the podium. He opened his mouth to begin the speech, and every alarm in the station screamed at once. Not one system, not one sector, every system. Across orbit, Dominion commanders watched their tactical displays flood with impossible readings. Multiple human target LOCKS confirmed. Werk froze. That's not possible, he whispered. A technician shouted, they're locking weapons, but they haven't even sent a declaration. Outside, the human fleet's energy signatures surged. Not chaotic, not reactive, but coordinated, like a single thought spreading across 13 bodies. Captain Rourke's voice came over open channel. Not loud, not emotional, just final. We're here for peace talks. A beat. Then the Dominion fleet detected the shift. Weapons charging. Silent. Synchronized. Inevitable. And in that moment, inside Iron Spire, the envoy finally realized something had gone terribly wrong. Because Earth had not arrived to be invited into peace. It had arrived already knowing how it would end. And the first shot had not yet been fired, but every ship in orbit suddenly understood it already had. The Dominion command network refused to believe the readings at first. Human weapon systems, active, locked, coordinated across 13 ships with precision that made no tactical sense for a peace delegation. Inside Iron Spire, alarms layered over one another until they became a single continuous scream. Stand down the human vessels, a Dominion admiral barked. They are violating diplomatic protocol. But the tactical officer hesitated. Sir, they never acknowledged protocol. That sentence changed the atmosphere in the room. Because it was true. The Dominion had assumed Earth would follow the rules. They had built entire diplomatic architecture around that assumption. Iron Spire wasn't just a station, it was a psychological weapon, a place where smaller civilizations were expected to feel small. But the humans weren't reacting like visitors. They were reacting like observers who had already assessed the room. Outside, Dominion cruisers began shifting formation, weapons still offline by treaty agreement. They were supposed to remain ceremonial until negotiations formally began. That was the agreement. That was always the agreement. Then the first human rail discharge struck. No warning pulse. No countdown. Just impact. A Dominion cruiser, vessel Halcyon Spear, didn't explode. It simply split. Cleanly. Perfectly. Like space had decided to unwrite it. The two halves drifted apart slowly, still glowing from internal systems, still transmitting for a few seconds before going silent mid-sentence. Inside the human flagship, there was no celebration. No emotion. Only confirmation. First structural target neutralized, a sensor officer reported. Captain Rourke watched the unfolding battlefield like a man watching weather patterns shift. They assumed we came to talk, he said. A junior officer swallowed hard, didn't we? Rourke didn't answer immediately. Then, we came to end assumptions. A second volley launched. This time, not a single ship was hit directly. Instead, multiple Dominion vessels flickered as their navigation systems failed simultaneously. Entire cruisers began drifting out of formation as if gravity had forgotten them. Loss of maneuver control, someone shouted across Dominion channels. We're being overridden. No, another voice corrected, panicked. We're being mapped. Inside Iron Spire, the envoy finally stepped back from the podium. The prepared speech, centuries of diplomatic doctrine, suddenly felt irrelevant. Because outside the transparent walls, the stars were no longer arranged in a way that felt safe. Human ships were moving again. Not randomly. Not aggressively. Predictively. Every Dominion attempt to reposition was met with an immediate countershift, as if the humans had already simulated every possible outcome. A Dominion strategist stared at his display. This is impossible, he whispered. They're responding before we decide. A senior commander snapped. That violates causality models. But then a human signal cut across all channels. Captain Rourke again. Still calm. Still steady. Your fleet is assuming independence of action, he said. It's not. Inside the Dominion command sphere, confusion rippled. What does that mean? Someone demanded. Rourke continued. You're reacting like separate units. A pause. Then the final line. You are not separate. On Dominion screens, targeting data began collapsing into unified clusters. Their own AI systems flagged a horrifying anomaly. Enemy modeling internal decision structure. One officer stepped back. They're reading command hierarchy through behavior patterns. Another corrected, voice shaking. No, they're reading us like a single organism. Outside, human strikecraft detached from their motherships. They moved like fragments of darkness splitting into smaller intentions. Not chaotic, not independent. Each one a continuation of the same strategic thought. The Dominion fleet finally broke formation. That was the first real mistake. Because breaking formation revealed intent variance. And variance meant prediction. And prediction meant control. Inside Iron Spire, the envoy pressed a hand against the glass. This is still a diplomatic station, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. A junior aide whispered, Sir, diplomacy requires two sides agreeing to speak. The envoy turned sharply. And what are they doing? The aide hesitated, acting like the conversation already ended. Outside, Dominion ships began firing defensive bursts. Not coordinated. Not unified. Reactive. Human vessels adjusted instantly. Every shot was intercepted not by shields, but by absence. Energy dispersing into calculated empty space, as if the humans had simply moved reality slightly out of the way. A Dominion admiral shouted, They're not defending, they're preempting every trajectory. Captain Rourke finally spoke again. This is not war, he said. A pause. Then, this is correction. Inside Iron Spire, systems suddenly flickered. Not from damage. From interference. A new signal appeared across all channels, unidentified, layered, and deeply wrong. It didn't originate from human ships. It didn't originate from Dominion systems. It came from somewhere watching the engagement itself. The station AI hesitated, then displayed a single line. Unknown presence deity. And every combatant, human and Dominion alike, stopped for half a second as the realization settled in. Whatever was happening outside the station was no longer the only thing observing them. And for the first time since the engagement began, Captain Rourke narrowed his eyes slightly and said quietly, That's new. The moment the unknown signal appeared, the battlefield changed in a way no one immediately understood. It wasn't louder. It wasn't stronger. It was present in a way that didn't belong to any known communication system. Inside Iron Spire, Dominion sensors tried to isolate it. Human systems tried to classify it. Both failed in different ways. The signal didn't behave like data. It behaved like attention, as if something had simply turned its gaze toward the conflict and decided to stay. A Dominion analyst whispered, That's not a transmission, that's observation feedback. Before anyone could respond, the Dominion fleet broke formation completely. Not by command, not by strategy, by panic. One cruiser attempted to reposition behind Iron Spire's gravitational shadow. Another tried to retreat toward the outer corridor jump point. A third fired prematurely at a human strikecraft that wasn't even targeting it yet. That single act, firing without coordinated intent, was enough. Inside the human flagship Ashes of Dawn, Captain Rourke watched the cascading breakdown with quiet intensity. They're fragmenting, a tactical officer said. Command cohesion is collapsing. Rourke nodded slightly. No, he corrected, they're revealing it. On the holographic display, Dominion fleet structure began to unravel into individual decision loops. What had looked like a unified navy was now showing internal divergence rates, command delays, conflicting priorities, overlapping authority chains. Human AI systems immediately recalculated targeting priority. Sir, an officer asked, Do we continue engagement? Rourke didn't answer right away. His eyes were on something else. Not the Dominion ships, but the space between them. Because that space was no longer empty. Something in it was responding. The unknown signal pulsed again. Not as sound. Not as code. As structure. Inside Iron's spire, all external cameras briefly distorted, every feed showing a fractional delay, as if reality itself was buffering. Then Dominion ship Vigilant Crest went dark. No explosion. No debris. Just silence. A second later, it reappeared on sensors. Drifting, disabled, systems frozen mid-function. EMP, someone guessed. No, a technician replied, voice tight. It wasn't hit, it was paused. Human strike craft adjusted formation instantly, avoiding the disabled vessel without instruction. They had already accounted for it. That realization unsettled Dominion command, even more than the loss. They're not reacting, a strategist said, staring at the feed. They're continuing a precomputed flow. Another Dominion officer slammed a console. That's impossible. No engagement model can account for unknown interference. As if answering him, the unknown signal intensified. This time it spoke, not in words understood by language systems, but through translation layers that forced meaning into comprehension. Variants DATCTD and organized intent. Inside both fleets, every system paused for a fraction of a second. Then the message continued. Resolution required. Captain Rourke exhaled slowly. Now we've got a third party, he said. A junior officer swallowed. Sir, are we being targeted too? Rourke shook his head slightly. No, he said, we're being evaluated alongside them. Outside, Dominion ships attempted regrouping, but coordination failure was accelerating. Every attempt to reestablish formation introduced delays. Every delay increased prediction error. Every error made them more predictable. It was a collapse loop. Inside Iron's spire, the Dominion envoy finally abandoned the podium. He moved instead to the observation glass, watching his fleet break apart in slow, controlled failure. This was supposed to be diplomatic security, he muttered. A junior aide responded softly, we assumed stability. The envoy turned sharply. We built the station for stability. The aide hesitated. Then why is nothing stable anymore? Outside, a Dominion destroyer attempted a coordinated strike with 3 others. For a brief moment, it almost worked. Then all 4 ships simultaneously lost targeting synchronization, not due to jamming, not due to damage, but due to internal timing mismatch. They fired at slightly different moments. That was enough for human interception systems to erase the attack entirely. Captain Rourke's voice came across the channel again. Still calm. Still precise. You're treating war like a sequence, he said. A pause. But you're not sequenced. Inside Dominion Command, confusion turned to fear. What does that mean? Someone demanded. Rourke answered. Your parallel processes pretending to be unified. On Dominion screens, something horrifying updated automatically. Fleet behavior, non-convergent system. A senior commander whispered, we're not a fleet anymore. Another finished the thought. We're individuals under stress. Outside, human ships tightened formation slightly, not aggressively, but efficiently. Every movement was synchronized without visible communication. They didn't need signals. They were already aligned. Then the unknown presence spoke again. This time closer. Not through systems. Through perception itself. Observation complete, initial structure degradation. And then, the battlefield shifted again. Not destroyed. Not won, but reclassified. And in that moment, Captain Rourke realized something far more dangerous than the battle itself. The humans weren't just fighting the Dominion anymore. They were being included in the same evaluation. And whatever was watching them had just begun its second layer of analysis. The reclassification didn't feel like a change in the battlefield. It felt like the battlefield had suddenly stopped being the battlefield at all. Space around Iron Spire no longer behaved like a contested zone. It behaved like a controlled environment under review. Dominion ships drifting, human vessels holding formation, debris frozen in slow arcs. All of it existed inside a growing sense of structured observation. Then the third signal fully emerged. Not as an addition, as a replacement. Every system, human and Dominion, was overwritten with a single, unified presence indicator. Source, unknown/outside observable maps. Inside the Dominion command sphere, alarms stopped being useful. They no longer indicated damage or threat. They simply repeated the same classification error. Cannot resolve origin. A technician stared at his screen, pale. It's not inside our mapping range, he whispered. Not even outside it, it's unreferenced. Across the void, human ships experienced the same anomaly, but their response was different. Controlled silence. No panic. Just recalculation. Captain Rourke stood in the ashes of Dawn Bridge, watching the spire and surrounding space distort subtly, like something pressing against reality from the other side. Status, he asked. A tactical officer answered, voice tight. Unknown entity is now interacting with gravitational stabilization fields. A pause, and Dominion remnants are still drifting uncontrolled. Rourke nodded slightly. They're not the priority anymore, he said. That sentence made the room colder. A junior officer frowned. Sir. Rourke didn't look away from the hologram. Something else just took ownership of the space we're fighting in. Outside, the Iron Spire began to behave incorrectly. Not structurally. Conceptually. Its rotation stabilized, then paused, then reversed by a fraction of a degree without any propulsion change. Internal systems reported full integrity, yet external motion did not match physics models. Inside the Dominion envoy chamber, Verksal gripped the railing. This station is not moving under any applied force, a technician reported. Then what is moving it? Someone asked. No one answered, because the correct answer wasn't in their database. A new message appeared across all fleets again. But this time, it wasn't directed at either side. It was directed at the situation itself. You were not alone in this layer. The Dominion fleet reacted first. Not with attack, with withdrawal attempts. Several ships attempted emergency jump calculations. All failed. Not due to interdiction. Due to invalid destination space. One commander shouted, our jump coordinates are returning null space vectors. Human ships attempted the same diagnostic checks. Same result. Null space. Non-addressable region. Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. That's why they built the spire here, he said quietly. A tactical officer looked up. Sir. He answered without looking away. This isn't a neutral station. A pause. It's a marker. Inside the Dominion fleet, panic escalated. They trapped us here, someone yelled. No, another voice responded shakily. We trapped ourselves here the moment we agreed to meet here. Then the unknown signal changed tone. Not louder. Not faster. More precise. Containment field active. The words did not feel like communication. They felt like system status. Human ships immediately adjusted formation, not retreating, not advancing, stabilizing. Rourke noticed. You're assuming containment means hostility, he said. A junior officer responded quickly, isn't it? Rourke finally turned. His expression was unreadable. Not always, he said. Outside, Dominion ships began losing external sensor consistency. Cameras disagreed with radar. Radar disagreed with gravitational mapping. Systems that had always aligned now diverged slightly, like reality itself was introducing error margins. A Dominion scientist whispered, it's not attacking our systems. It's separating them, another finished. Inside Iron Spire, the envoy's voice broke for the first time. Why is it doing this? He asked. No one answered. because the answer required understanding intent that no species present had yet confirmed. Then the unknown presence spoke again, and this time it felt closer than before. You are a localized conflict inside a larger structure. A pause. Then, resolution cannot occur until VARIABLESR Human tactical AI flagged something immediately. Sir, it said to Rourke, we are being classified as variables. Rourke nodded slowly. That's new, he said. Outside, the containment field tightened, not physically but spatially. Distances between ships began to subtly lose meaning, targeting ranges recalibrated without input. Communication delays shortened beyond known physics limits. A Dominion cruiser attempted to fire again, but its weapons system refused activation. Not jammed, not destroyed, simply unavailable in current state definition. The commander stared at his console. We've been restricted, he whispered. Rourke heard it over open channel. He spoke quietly. Not restricted, he corrected. A pause. Rewritten. Silence spread across both fleets, because everyone realized the same thing at the same time. They were no longer operating inside a battle. They were operating inside a system that had started editing the rules mid-process. And at the center of it all, Iron Spire began to shift again, as if something inside it had finally decided to reveal what it was actually built to observe. Iron Spire was no longer behaving like a station. It was behaving like an interface. Not a building, not a diplomatic hub, a layer between systems of understanding. Inside the Dominion command sphere, that realization arrived slowly, then all at once. Every sensor reading began to align toward the same impossible conclusion. The Spire was not hosting the conflict, it was hosting the observer of the conflict. Captain Rourke felt it too, though he didn't say it immediately. The bridge of the Ashes of Dawn had gone unusually still. Even the hum of systems seemed subdued, like machinery realizing it was being watched while running. A tactical officer spoke quietly. All containment metrics are stabilizing, but not in our favor. Rourke nodded slightly. That means it's choosing consistency, he said. A junior officer frowned. Choosing, sir. Rourke didn't look away from the holographic field. Whatever this is, he said, it doesn't tolerate uncertainty in its environment. Outside, Dominion ships remained frozen in fragmented formation states. Human vessels held steady, but even their AI systems were now running deeper diagnostic loops than usual, trying to model the unknown presence that had redefined the battlefield. Then the Spire changed. Not visually at first. Internally. Every active system, human, Dominion, even auxiliary probes, received a synchronized update packet. No origin trace. No transmission vector. Just presence. And within that packet, a structure began unfolding itself across all languages simultaneously. Not translated. Constructed. This space was DESI, an ATD4 interaction between CIVILIZATO and S. A pause. Then, interaction has degenerated into non-resolvable conflict behavior. Inside Dominion Command, panic flared again. That's not a system message, someone said. That's a judgment. The unknown presence continued. Observation priority SHIFTED. Human systems immediately flagged that line. Captain Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. Shifted to what? He muttered. The answer came instantly. Baseline environmental control. A Dominion scientist whispered, environmental control of what? No one answered. Because at that exact moment, gravity around Iron Spire subtly recalibrated again. Not enough to move ships violently, but enough to make every navigation system recalculate inertia models. Then the structure beneath the Spire revealed itself. It was not visible in normal spectra, not detectable in standard scans. But when gravitational anomalies were mapped, something vast appeared beneath everything. A lattice, enormous, ancient, interwoven through space like a framework that had been there long before the Dominion ever discovered faster-than-light travel. A Dominion officer's voice broke. "That station is anchored to something." A second voice corrected him, terrified. "No, the station is just the surface layer." Inside the human fleet, silence deepened. Rourke finally spoke. "Bring up deep field resonance mapping." A pause. Then the result appeared, and even the AI hesitated before displaying it. The spire was not a structure. It was a node, connected to something spanning sectors of space that no known civilization had mapped. Something that didn't orbit stars. It organized them. A junior officer whispered, "That's not possible." Rourke answered quietly, "It wasn't built to be understood from here." Outside, the unknown presence spoke again. But this time its tone had changed. Less analytical. More direct. "You have reached a containment layer." A pause. Longer this time. Then, "This layer is compromised." Dominion commanders froze. "Compromised by what?" someone demanded. The answer came instantly. "Your interaction behavior." Inside Iron Spire, Verksal stepped back from the observation glass. "This isn't a diplomatic failure," he whispered. A junior aide responded, voice shaking. "Then what is it?" Verk didn't answer immediately, because the truth forming in his mind was too large to accept quickly. Finally, he said, "This is a system designed to contain civilizations that cannot stop escalating conflict." Silence. Outside, a Dominion cruiser attempted to broadcast a surrender signal. But the signal never left the ship. It was intercepted internally. Not blocked, reinterpreted, and then suppressed as non-functional behavior. The commander stared at his console in disbelief. "Our own systems are rejecting surrender protocols." Human ships noticed it immediately. A tactical officer spoke. "Sir, they can't disengage anymore." Rourke's expression tightened slightly. "That's because disengagement isn't a recognized outcome in this environment anymore." A pause. Only resolution states. Outside, the lattice beneath reality pulsed once. And the unknown presence spoke again. This time closer. Not across fleets. Across perception itself. Resolution options available. A list began forming across all systems. Not of commands, not of weapons, but of outcomes. Containment, reset, isolation, termination, reclassification. Each option marked with probability streams and structural consequences beyond current understanding. A Dominion officer screamed, "Those are extinction-level categories." Human AI systems flagged the same classification. But Rourke did not move. He simply stared at the list, then asked quietly, "Where are we on it?" The answer came after a delay that felt too long to be comforting. "You are included in all options." Silence fell across every ship, because at that moment, every civilization present understood the same thing. They were not participants in the system anymore. They were variables inside a process that had begun deciding what to do with them. And somewhere deep beneath Iron Spire's impossible structure, something had just finished waking up enough to make its first true decision. The list of resolution options didn't disappear. It waited, floating across every Dominion console, every human tactical screen, every broken emergency channel like a question that refused to be ignored. Containment, reset, isolation, termination, reclassification. No fleet commander had ever seen a system that offered outcomes instead of commands. And that was what made it terrifying. Inside the ashes of dawn, the bridge crew waited for Captain Rourke to respond. Not because he was the highest rank in the room, but because, at this point, he was the only one still treating the situation like it belonged in the realm of decisions rather than inevitability. A junior officer finally spoke, voice tight. Sir, if those are real options, then we're already inside something we don't control. Rourke didn't look away from the holographic field. That's been true since the Spire woke up, he said. A pause. Then he turned slightly. Question is whether we act like variables or authors. A silence followed that felt heavier than the battlefield itself. Across the Dominion fleet, panic was escalating into fragmentation. Some commanders attempted surrender protocols again. Others tried system shutdowns. A few attempted full offensive escalation out of pure instinctive denial. Every attempt failed in different ways. Surrender protocols were invalidated. Shutdown commands were refused. Offensive systems returned error states, action undefined in current frame. It wasn't resistance. It was rejection by reality structure. Inside Iron Spire, Verksal stared at his flickering command console. This isn't warfare, he whispered. It's enforcement. A Dominion analyst responded shakily. Enforcement of what? Verk hesitated. Behavior. Outside, the unknown presence responded to the confusion spreading across both fleets. Not emotionally. Not conversationally. Structurally. Intervention criteria met. Immediately, every ship felt it. Not force. Not attack. A shift in permissions. Human systems flagged it first. Captain Rourke's tactical display updated without input. Sir, an officer said, our external maneuver constraints just changed. Rourke nodded once. They're testing response elasticity, he said. A junior officer frowned, meaning. Rourke answered without hesitation. Meaning it's checking how we behave when rules move. Outside, Dominion ships experienced a far more dramatic change. Weapon systems didn't shut down. They were redefined. One cruiser attempted to fire. The system executed the command. But nothing emerged. Not because it failed. Because weapon discharge had been reclassified as non-applicable interaction state for that vessel class. The commander stared in disbelief. They didn't disable us, he said slowly. They removed firing from possibility. Inside the human fleet, silence deepened further. Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not containment, he said quietly. A pause. That's governance. Then, for the first time since contact began, he opened a fleet-wide channel. Not to negotiate. Not to threaten. But to synchronize. All human vessels, he said calmly, broadcast full structural truth package. A tactical officer looked up sharply. Sir, that includes. I know what it includes, Rourke interrupted. A beat. Send it. And Earth answered. Across 13 ships, data streams flared outward simultaneously. Not weapons data, not military encryption, but something far more dangerous to any observing intelligence. Humanity's full behavioral record. Not curated. Not diplomatic. Wars that were won and lost, civil conflicts, broken treaties, peace periods that collapsed under pressure, cooperation that emerged under necessity, chaos, contradiction, adaptation, regression, recovery. Everything. Raw humanity. Inside Dominion Command, analysts tried to process it. Why are they broadcasting vulnerabilities? One asked. Another answered, horrified. Because they're not treating it as vulnerability. On the unknown presence layer, something shifted. Nonlinear civilization profile DATSCTD. A pause. Then, high variance, high adaptation, low stability index. Inside human systems, the AI flagged immediate concern. Sir, it said to Rourke, the entity is attempting classification stability mapping using our data. Rourke exhaled slowly. So it's building a model of us, he said. Yes. A pause. And failing, the AI added. That last word mattered. Failing, not because of lack of data, but because humanity refused consistent patterns. Outside, the unknown presence reacted again. Internal model insufficient. Across Dominion and human fleets alike, Tension tightened. Verk Sol whispered, "It can't understand us." A Dominion scientist corrected him quietly. "No, it understands too much, that's the problem." Then the entity did something new. It stopped observing externally and began interacting internally. Every ship, human and Dominion, felt it at once. A restructuring of perception layers. Not hacking, not intrusion, reframing. And suddenly, everyone saw the battlefield differently. Not as ships, not as factions, but as behavioral nodes inside a single interactive system. Dominion fleets were no longer enemies. Human fleets were no longer opposing force. They were inputs and outputs. Rourke's expression tightened. "Everyone hold position," he ordered. A junior officer asked, "Sir, is it rewriting our perception?" Rourke answered quietly, "No." A pause. "It's revealing how it already sees us." Then the unknown presence spoke again. This time not offering options, but asking the first real question that mattered. "What is your intent in this layer?" Silence. Across all fleets. No one answered immediately. Because for the first time, both Dominion and humanity realized the same thing. Every weapon, every defense, every negotiation had been happening inside a system that no longer cared what they called it, only what they intended next. And Captain Rourke finally stepped forward, about to answer something that would determine whether humanity was classified or reclassified. The question hung across every system like gravity made into language. "What is your intent in this layer?" No fleet moved. Not because they were frozen, because movement suddenly felt like an answer too dangerous to give without thought. Inside Iron Spire, Dominion officials stared at each other, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak first. But the problem wasn't courage anymore. It was definition. If they answered incorrectly, they feared they might not just lose the battle, but be categorized out of existence. Across the void, Captain Rourke stood on the bridge of the Ashes of Dawn, eyes fixed on the expanding lattice beneath reality. A junior officer finally broke the silence. "Sir, if it's asking intent, then it already doesn't see this as war." Rourke nodded slightly. "That's because it doesn't see sides," he said. A pause. "It sees behavior under pressure." Outside, the unknown presence intensified its judgment field. Space itself felt thinner, like layers of meaning were being peeled apart one by one. Dominion ships flickered between states, sometimes visible, sometimes reduced to data silhouettes depending on what angle they were being evaluated from. One Dominion commander shouted over open channels, voice breaking. "This is unlawful interference. We are sovereign military entities." No response. Not because the entity ignored him, but because sovereignty was not a recognized parameter in the current system layer. Instead, the entity replied to all fleets again. "Intent must be declared or inferred." A pause. Then, inference in progress. Inside human systems, alarms began firing again, but differently now. Not warnings of attack, warnings of classification drift. "Sir," a tactical officer said, "it's building a behavioral model from our reactions." Rourke's jaw tightened slightly. "So every hesitation is data," he muttered. "Yes, and every action. Also data." A long silence followed. Then Rourke said quietly, "So it's not judging what we do." A pause. "It's judging what we are consistent about." Outside, Dominion fleets attempted one last coordinated effort. Not attack, not surrender, but stabilization. A desperate attempt to unify command signals into a single coherent declaration. But the attempt failed instantly, because the entity had already identified internal disagreement thresholds. Every variation in command structure collapsed the attempt before it fully formed. Inside Dominion Command, fear finally turned into understanding. "We are not a fleet," one admiral said slowly. A scientist corrected him, voice hollow. "We never were. We were synchronized disagreement systems. Inside Iron Spire, Verksal stepped away from the console entirely. We built diplomacy around the assumption that intent could be hidden, he whispered. A junior aide asked, "Can it?" Verk didn't answer, because the answer was already being proven false in real time. Across all human ships, Captain Rurk finally raised his hand. "Broadcast response," he said. A tactical officer hesitated. "Sir, full intent declaration." Rurk nodded. "All of it." A pause. "Not curated." That word mattered. Because for the first time, humanity wasn't choosing what to present. It was choosing to be measured completely. Across 13 ships, the signal went out. Not weapons data, not diplomacy, but intent layers. Survival expansion, fear, cooperation, protection, retaliation, curiosity, repetition, contradiction. Humanity unfiltered. Inside Dominion systems, analysts froze again. "They're exposing internal conflict states," one whispered. Another corrected him. "No, they're showing they don't resolve into a single state." On the judgment field layer, the unknown presence reacted. High variance confirmed. A pause. Longer than before. Then, intent is not single state. Inside human fleet systems, the AI flagged escalation risk. "Sir," it said to Rurk, "classification outcome is unstable." Rurk exhaled slowly. "So are we," he replied. Outside, the judgment field tightened. Not violently, but precisely. Like a system preparing to finalize categorization. Dominion ships began displaying new overlays. Alignment score, undefined. Coherence score, failing. Resolution status, pending. A Dominion commander shouted, "What does failing mean?" No answer came from his systems. But the entity responded instead. Failure to converge into predictable behavior. Silence fell again. Then, "This is a critical condition." Inside Iron Spire, Verksal whispered, "Critical for who?" A technician answered softly, "For the system." And that was the moment it became clear. They were not being attacked. They were being processed. Not as enemies. Not as allies. But as unpredictable variables inside a system designed to eliminate unpredictability. Outside, Captain Rurk finally stepped forward again. And for the first time, his voice carried something beyond calculation. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. "You want intent," he said across open channels. A pause. Then, "Here it is." All fleets held still. Even the unknown presence reduced its output slightly, as if focusing. Rurk continued. "We intend to continue existing." A beat. "On our terms." Silence followed that statement like a held breath across space. Because for the first time, the entity did not immediately respond. It processed, and in that delay, every civilization present understood something critical. Whatever came next would not be a correction. It would be a verdict. The silence after Captain Rurk's declaration was not empty. It was measured. Every fleet, Dominion and human alike, waited inside a system that no longer behaved like a battlefield, a treaty space, or even a diplomatic construct. Iron Spire no longer felt like a location. It felt like a threshold. And beyond it, something was deciding what continued existence on one's own terms actually meant in a universe that had never been asked to tolerate unpredictability at this scale. Then the unknown presence responded. Not immediately, not emotionally, but definitively. Intent registered. A pause followed so long that Dominion command systems began flagging it as structural instability in the entity itself. But then the structure corrected, and reality stabilized again. Evaluation complete, Phase 1. Inside Dominion fleets, relief tried to form, but failed to fully take shape because no one trusted what Phase 1 implied. Inside human systems, Captain Rurk did not relax. A junior officer spoke quietly. Sir, phase one of what? Rourke stared at the holographic field where the lattice beneath space was still faintly visible, like a skeleton of something far larger than the battlefield they stood in. I don't think we're at the end of anything, he said. A pause. We're at the end of misunderstanding what this is. Across the void, the entity continued. Civilization classification updated. Immediately, Dominion systems began receiving structural overlays. Stability fragmented. Cohesion conditional. Conflict suppression incomplete. Then human overlays appeared. Stability nonlinear. Adaptation high. Predictive reliability low. Behavioral drift extreme. A Dominion scientist whispered, "We're being ranked." Another corrected him softly. "No, we're being placed." Inside Iron's spire, Verksal looked at the data streams with hollow realization. "This isn't a judgment," he said. A junior aide asked, "Then what is it?" Verk hesitated. "A sorting layer," he answered. Outside, the unknown presence shifted again. Not expanding. Not contracting. Reorganizing the field itself. The spire's internal structure began revealing additional layers, previously invisible sectors of the lattice expanding outward like petals unfolding in reverse. And then something impossible appeared. Other nodes. Far away, across sectors, across regions no known map included. Iron's spire was not alone. It was one of many. A Dominion commander froze. "There are more of these." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Not stations," he said quietly. A pause. "Instances." The entity confirmed it. An ETWRKED observation layer, active. Silence spread again, because now the implication was undeniable. This was not first contact. It was continuation of an existing system. Inside Dominion Command, fear shifted into something more dangerous, existential reinterpretation. "We are not the first civilization here," someone whispered. Another corrected him. "We are not even the first ones evaluated." Inside human fleet systems, the AI flagged a deeper anomaly. "Sir," it said, "this layer predates all known hyperspace infrastructure." Rourke nodded once. "So someone built it," he said. A pause. "And left it running." Outside, the entity responded. "Construction origin, not currently relevant." That sentence alone changed everything. Because it implied intention existed, but ownership did not matter anymore. Then the final classification layer began to form. Slowly, deliberately, across every screen, across every fleet, across every mind interfacing with system translation layers. Final state pending, civilization response class. A Dominion admiral shouted, "Response to what?" No answer, because the question was no longer about events. It was about future behavior under observation conditions that would continue indefinitely. Inside human fleet, Rourke stepped forward one last time. "Whatever you're deciding," he said into the open channel, "understand this." A pause. "We're not a finished product." The entity responded instantly. Acknowledged. Another pause. Then, finished PRODUCTS are not eligible for continuation layers. That line hit both fleets differently. Dominion commanders felt dread. Human crews felt something closer to defiance, because it implied something terrifying. Completion meant removal from the system entirely. Rourke narrowed his eyes. "So that's the game," he said quietly. A junior officer asked, "Sir." Rourke answered without looking away from the lattice forming beyond reality. "It doesn't judge strength," he said. "It judges whether you stop changing." Outside, the entity finalized its Phase 1 output. Civilization status unresolved. A pause. Then, recommendation, continued observation. And for the first time since contact began, something like distance re-entered the battlefield. The containment field loosened, not released, not ended, but paused. Dominion ships stabilized. Human fleets regained full control. Iron Spire stopped shifting. The lattice beneath reality dimmed, but did not disappear. Captain Rourke exhaled slowly. A junior officer spoke softly. "Sir, we survived." Rourke looked at the stars beyond the spire. "I don't think that was survival," he said. A pause. "I think that was being noticed." Across the void, the final message appeared, not as threat, not as reward, but as statement. "Return when your intent, EVOLVES." Then silence. Not the silence of absence. The silence of waiting systems, resuming baseline monitoring. And as the human fleet turned away from Iron Spire, Rourke made one last observation that no one immediately challenged, but everyone remembered. Because far behind them, beyond the drifting Dominion ships and fatting anomaly fields, the lattice was still there. Still active. Still watching. And somewhere deeper in that impossible network, something had already started updating Earth's file for the next encounter.